Hello, Jacob.
Hello.
Um, I just don't know if you remember, but we kind of connected up back in the Google Plus days.
Yes.
Okay, I
Those,
didn't know if you remembered me.
those long ago halcyon days. Yes. I miss it every day. I don't know, it's almost habit to type in my web browser plus.google.com and there's nothing but
It was that
sadness.
way for a while for me. I
Uh-huh.
would find myself, yeah.
Yeah.
It is such a strange. It came at such a wonderful time and was such a magical thing, and then now it's I say it's just gone.
Yep.
And I was involved in other hobbies at the time, but nothing compared to the robustness of Google Plus for
Mhm.
the RPG hobby.
Absolutely. Well, I think it worked so well because so many people had blogs at that time and it scooped everybody up. And so I mean, the thing that I saw that made Google Plus more different than any other social media, kind of thing was that here were all of these people that were basically doing the same thing or involved in the same hobby, and they were able to find each other immediately. Because if you get onto Twitter and you're like, oh, let me do some hashtag searches, or Instagram and like, let me do some hashtag searches, like you don't even know what you're going to find. Like Facebook kind of had it easy because it's like you were with your friends and then your family, right? For the most part. But then Google Plus was weird because it was that circle sharing at the beginning because
Oh
one
yeah,
person could identify and curate the group and be like, oh, here's all these people that are worth talking to, put it in a circle and then share it. So coming into that and being able to find like, oh, wow, here's like 400 people that are all kind of talking about the same thing was great. It was fantastic. And so I missed that part quite a bit. Quite
yeah.
a
I'm
bit.
not going to say there weren't any bad eggs,
Of
but I will
course.
say that. But going into it, it's like I was shocked at how many people I made connections with so
Yeah.
quickly. And I would say signal to noise ratio was better than anything else I've ever seen. Like
Absolutely.
it's not like Twitter where all of a sudden you're like, wow, I got to spend a lot of time curating.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. Well, and then it was good because you could I had a circle called the abyss, right? Because there are some people that I couldn't handle um all the time. And that's the thing I think is that you have people that they post really good stuff and they make really good things, but then they go off on the deep end about anything. It could be about their the personal shit that they're dealing with. It could
Yeah.
be about politics, it could be about whatever. I mean, and sometimes it's like, look, I want to see what you post, I want to see what you make, but I really don't want to know about the process because there's you're sharing too much of how the sausage is being made, and like I am struggling right now and I don't need that too.
Right.
And so I could be like, go over there for a while, but I still want to look at your art, or I still want to read your blog post, or I still want to whatever. And a lot of these other things, it's either you mute them completely or you block them or ban them. And so I think that there were just these little quality of life things that Google Plus had that were fantastic, and nobody else has gotten that in my opinion. So that's the main thing that I miss, I guess.
Yeah, I think there is a robustness in general for siloed groups in Facebook,
Mm.
but it is definitely very siloed.
I don't know. I've tried, and even then, like have I'm in this group for like risograph printing, and it's cool, but I swear that the algorithm is still showing you only what it wants to show you from that group. Like it doesn't just give you, here are today's posts and here's what people are talking about. It's like, oh, here's
Right.
that thing from 3 days ago, and nobody's talking on that thread anymore. And oh, you're trying to search for something, lol. Like you're not going to find
Right.
anything that you're actually looking for. So I mean, when I've tried, I just feel like I've like run my face into the ground. So I just don't on Facebook. I don't know.
Well, so we have an RPG zine group that's pretty robust,
Cool.
and there's a couple others that I dabble in, but I think I'm the type of person I don't necessarily whatever system I don't go full in. I'm not like like Fate Core. I'm just Fate Core guy, or I'm just
Right.
a D&D guy, or I'm just an old school essentials. It's just like, but it does seem like that there are certain groups that there is a lot of activity. It does pretty good,
Mhm.
but you're right. There's others that probably are just still kind of weird, and
Yep.
there's not a lot of. I think that's a problem. Is yeah, it's just a lot of yeah. It's just not definitely not the same.
Yep. Oh, well, those were beautiful, wonderful days. And now we are on the other side of them. I think there were people, I saw some people talking about how, um, because I guess there was the Forge before,
Yeah.
in the olden days. I never participated in that whatsoever, but, obviously it had a big impact on like a group of people. And there was like the post Forge and all that stuff. Whereas, I think there's at least a number of us that were the post Google Plus. That was yeah, it was the place. It worked. It was great. Everybody thought we were weird, but it was very nice.
Yeah, and it like I say, it introduced me to a lot of people, introduced me to probably some games I probably wouldn't have normally have considered. And I
Absolutely.
think it's in a way you're able to curate and section off and even your own stuff. It
Mhm.
was really well nice. But I think like now, obviously, Discord's a big thing, but I think I find myself and a lot of older people just find that very difficult to use on a regular basis.
Well, I think Discord is just IRC, right? I mean,
Yeah,
it's a big
yeah,
chat, it's a big chat room. It's been done before. Now it's more centralized, and that's fine and that's cool. And you've got little gifs and stickers and emojis and stuff. That's awesome. But yeah, it's an ongoing chat room. Because I remember when, people were saying when Google Plus was dying, it's like, well, where are we gonna go? And Discord kept coming up and up, and like I have a Discord now, but it's just a chat. Whereas again, I think that thing that made it that made Google Plus so nice was that everybody was blogging pretty much, at least it got on there initially. So there was that everybody sort of had a home base and they were already focused on creation. Um, and so then they were sharing their posts on Google Plus, and then you could have your comments there on Google Plus, and it was nice. Whereas something like Discord, it's a chat room, and people come in and they drop a link and they talk about something for a while, and then you're never really able to find it again because, oh man, Discord search is like I'm talking bad
right.
about Facebook search, but Discord search is just ridiculous. Like you're there and you see it in the moment, or you don't, and you just don't. So yeah, it works and it has some good stuff, but yeah, it's not a replacement, as a good place to have. I don't know what the difference between the conversations that you have in Discord versus like on a
Well,
pseudo
the
forum.
difference is it's definitely kind of like with Facebook. There's a topic, and everybody comments on
Mhm.
that topic rather than just being a wall of chat.
Yeah.
And I can't remember if you could save. I can't remember if you can save. Well, and that's the other thing too, is because you could also just, that's where you just put you like you can with Facebook. You could just do a response with a dot, and then you could
Oh
follow the
yeah.
chat without having to go find it every time. And you could
The
there's yeah.
subscribing with a dot to the topic. Yeah. So then you could watch it and get notifications on it. That was a nice little workaround too. And yeah, there's nothing. I mean, I like Twitter, you can't do anything like that. Either you see it or you don't, and you participate or you don't. And then the threads get split all over the place. And so yes, people are having a conversation, but where is that conversation? And what piece of the conversation am I currently seeing? Makes it
Yeah,
tough.
exactly.
Yeah. Right. And then I mean, and of course, I think that's one of the reasons that hot takes work so well on Twitter is because you don't that's really all you're going to see, right? And you don't know where in the process you're going to see. So then you have, one person shit posts and then another person shit post to the shit post, and it goes off
Yeah.
in this total tangent. And then people are like, what's even going on? Why are we talking about downshifting all of a sudden? I don't understand. And then you're like, oh, okay, I see it. But you have to dig. You can't just like find it. Um, so I don't know.
And I also find with Twitter, um, it's like I've curated enough that I get a decent feed of things coming in,
Mhm.
but I really don't know how. Other than me posting podcasts, I really don't know how to engage it rather than the superficial. Hey, tell me what you're working on, or hey, promote
Right.
whatever it may be. It's just like I don't know really. I don't feel like. I guess I don't know what I'm supposed to do.
Yep.
It's
No, exactly. I had a post on, and one that's the thing too. I had one post on Twitter that sort of kind of blew up. I mean, it was a very small, bump, but it was one of the biggest posts that I'd gotten, and I got no new followers. I got no new nothing. Like it was Like nothing really happened from it, except I got a whole bunch of notifications one day, which was cool and it felt neat, but it wasn't, the connection isn't there in the same way, which is interesting. I don't know, because it's like it tries to be, but it doesn't, it just doesn't do it. Anyway, I don't know.
Well, and you're limited by what you can type, other what you can generate
Sure.
a string, but it's not like you can say, hey, I've got this idea, let's do a jam,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it may be, where it's like, let's riff off of this, or hey, there's no really opportunity for that.
Yeah.
It's really just, I guess, hot takes on hot takes. Is that really?
Yeah, for better or for worse. I mean, there were those Gygaxian democracy threads and stuff on Google Plus where it's like, hey, here's this topic, everybody contributes something to this, like, D100 table, and people would throw in stuff, and it was all there in
Oh,
this
let's
nice, neat
let's
little
back this
box.
up.
Sure.
Gygaxian democracy. Was that a term used?
Yes, that was a term used in the
I love
dark
it.
circles of, yeah, it was, you know,
That should be the name of a zine.
it probably could be. I mean, it's probably cursed. It's probably a cursed term. I shouldn't have said it out loud, but I said it. Um, and there we go. It was good. I mean, that's the thing. There were good things in the past that happened, and yeah. And then everybody would participate, and people would chime in, like, number 37. Like, it's like, okay, we're talking about a swamp. What's 100 things you can find in the swamp? And everybody would put it there, and all the comments would be nice and neat, and people could come in and say, like, oh, okay, I see right now that we're at like number 37. All right, well, I'm going to type in number 38 to like save that spot, and then they could come back and fill it in, if they had an idea but then didn't have an idea, and then there it was. It was very interesting. And so that sort of like opportunity for, I mean, I don't necessarily want to say effortless collaboration, but I mean, those kinds of things were happening. And I feel like you can't do that in the same way. And I don't know if it's that the people are different because they're on different, social media platforms, or and so like they're more spread out and they're broken, and just like the group that existed is no longer there, or if it's just the algorithm of Facebook and the algorithm of Twitter is not really going to let something like that happen in the same way. Like, to do something like that on Twitter, where somebody's like, here's the topic, and everybody put like a reply for something that's in a table, like I can't even imagine how that would happen functionally, or what that would even look like, in the app itself, when you're trying to see, like, okay, well, who did somebody do 25, or are we on 15? What are we? Oh, here's a 57 that just got fed to me. Where even are we? How do I participate in that? um Reddit seemed like it could have been a good place, and I was really hoping that Reddit could take off more, because it has the nice, threaded comments, and you can reply to replies and stuff, and it keeps it nested, which is good. Um, I feel like Reddit has destroyed me from using like old school forums, right? Because like an old school forum where it's just this one list and you have the pages and stuff, and I'm like, I don't even know where in the conversation anything is. I can't handle this. Whereas, Reddit, I like, you've got, okay, you have your big topic comment, and then you've got your little comments underneath it. And that worked out well, but it didn't do it like Google Plus. I don't know. For me, I think it's because I'm more visual and I like all the pictures. I like the big blocks. Like, here's a block with a picture in it, and then there's stuff underneath it, as opposed to just like a thread. But
Yeah, and I think too, there's probably a couple of things. I mean, obviously the software, the interface, and the way it puts information
mhm.
influences the kind of conversations that will be had, I think. But also, I think people come also probably to the different forums or different platforms for different
Different
things.
things. Yeah, absolutely.
Because I think Twitter it's kind of gets lost.
Hmm.
I mean, I think I use Facebook. I use Facebook strictly for certain forums for certain particular things. So if I'm wanting a particular amount of information, I will normally do that. Usually Twitter, I kind of use to kind of find maybe new and interesting people posting stuff. I mean, it's
Hmm.
really, but I don't normally interact with those people a lot. But I don't really
Legit.
normally interact with individual. I don't interact with individuals on Facebook groups either. I just interact with the forum. I don't know.
It's interesting. I mean, it's an interesting kind of, I don't know if I want to call it a problem, but I mean, it's sort of, it's an interesting situation. So,
Well, I think Reddit is good, except it's kind of arcane in a way that you find stuff and interface with it.
mm-hmm.
And I think
if you can find a small subreddit that's focused, it's good. The bigger ones are just, if you're not posting memes, you get nothing. So I don't know. So if you can find the small focused one, but even then it just becomes, I don't know, it runs into the moderation problem. I think like you need to have a moderator for that big forum. You can't necessarily self-moderate something. So like if I post something on Reddit and like it starts turning into a dumpster fire, like I don't have the ability to go in and be like, we're just cleaning this up on my own thread, and I'm sort of taking responsibility for my own post and doing that, where I think you could do more of that on Google Plus, where, you know, you would have your post, you would have your thing. And then if somebody came in there and started just going, you know, batshit for whatever reason, you could start nuking those posts. So you kind of self-moderated. I hadn't really thought about that until this moment, but there you go.
Yeah, and I think the thing too is, like, I may not know all the places I want to subscribe or I want to get information, but let's say there's a handful of people. I'm very interested in the things that they're interested in. Like,
right.
For instance, like for you, it's like maybe, you know, certain types of art, maybe certain types of publishing. Maybe another guy like Clay Notestein could be on typographic stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I'm just more interested in the stuff that they're engaging in or seeing, more than me just hunting down and being trapped in all these endless forums.
Absolutely.
And that's where I think Facebook, you can be friends with people on Facebook, but for me on Facebook, I use Facebook, my own personal profile, well, no profile I got, but my own personal profiles is churning out RPG stuff. It's just odds and ends, not really.
And see, that's the thing, is that I think every person has different facets in their life, and they have different things that they like. And I did like that later on in Google Plus, where people could do collections.
Yeah.
And so I had my RPG stuff, I had my music stuff that I liked, I had an art thing. And so then if you were interested in the things that I liked, then you could follow one of my collections. But then also, if I liked different people, I like, that's one of the things that I really struggle with on Twitter, is that I have a lot of like programmer people that I follow because they're doing things that are interesting. I have a bunch of like pixel art people that I follow because they're doing interesting stuff. I have my RPG people that I follow because they're doing interesting stuff. But if I want to keep them separated, you know, to get all musical there, I need to have like different accounts for each one. I can't group people into a circle and be like, hey, here's all my programmers. They're all in a group. You know what? Let me check in and see what they've been talking about recently. And I click over onto the circle, and then here's the feed of all of their conversations that I have chosen that they go in that programmer category. Maybe they don't actually go in the programmer category. Maybe they would put themselves in some different category, but I was the one that got to say like, no, you belong with these people. I'm going to put you in that little shelf, and you belong with those people. And I'm going to put you on that little shelf. And sometimes I'm going to go and I'm going to look at that little shelf and see what's going on. And then maybe I'll jump into the conversation, or maybe I won't. And I mean, I miss that a lot. I don't know. It's crazy, but I guess.
I think the other problem with Twitter is like, if I like a person or follow a person, everything they like, then just they hit a like on jumps. And that's what's killed me on people.
Yeah.
Like their feed's good, but they'll like stuff. And I'm like, I can't take this anymore.
You know, I mean, and honestly, who knows? That could be one of the reasons that, yes, on Twitter, though, I have it set up so that I get my posts in chronological order. So I don't see that, because I can't stand it. I follow people. I 9 times out of 10 turn off their retweets. And then put it in chronological order, and it's been a lot better for me. But then I'm sure that there are other people who are like seeing the things that I like, and they're like, what the hell is this shit? And then, you know, I don't know. Because I don't necessarily think about things when I hit that like button, and I probably should. Because because it does. It feeds it. If you have it on the purely the algorithm, purely the algorithm version, it is going to show that kind of crap.
But
Which
sometimes
is
it's
not.
good. If people like
It
good
is
stuff, it's great. Or retweet, I'm happy with
right.
it. But that's what happens is I end up culling people based on what they post and what they like.
Mm-hmm. And
And
those are different things. Those are different facets potentially, yeah. And you can't, there's no way that you can really sort that, group that, organize that, like filter it so that you can get to the good stuff. Cause I think there's good stuff all over the place. You just,
like there's one guy that followed me. I'm like, oh, I'll just, because that's what I'll do. I'll look at their what they post to go to there and see it. I'll follow them back. And if it's reasonable, and I did it, and it was like pornographic gifts that they were liking. I'm like,
right.
Like, okay, I don't need every time you like one of these things to show up in my feed. I don't need this.
Yes, this is not the discoverability that I am looking for in the social media platform. I mean,
I guess I should have known that stuff was out there on Twitter. I was clueless. I'm like, there's that. I guess that's a thing. And I looked, and like that person just posts these gifts, and it's just like, wow. Okay.
Yep.
And I think political season, that's where it comes into play too. It's like,
always,
I don't mind with Facebook. Like, I don't mind people having opinions different than myself. I don't, sure. I'm fine with that. If somebody has a well-reasoned say, hey, whatever, whether it's pro or against a candidate, if it's well-reasoned, I don't have a problem with that. I enjoy that, but boy, there just doesn't seem to be any sort of reasonable ground with any candidate on either side, from either side. It's just
anything.
It's like, at the point where it's like, okay, it's election season. I got to stop this.
Yep. Yep.
So, but
it's
anyway, we will not solve that. I don't think we're not Elon Musk. I guess if I was Elon Musk, I could throw $40 billion at a social media platform and create one just for RPGs. But
we need to just learn to code and build our own, and we'll be fine.
So back in the day, in the Google Plus days, you were asking for, because I had some textures that I posted. I was doing photography.
Oh yeah. Yes.
And you were working on, what were those textures? I don't know that you ever used my textures, but was that you working on Hot Springs Island at the time, or was this pre Hot Springs Island?
No, that would have been when I was working on Hot Springs Island. It was coming together, and so I was trying to use different textures for things, but I think I have to scroll back quite a ways. I am pretty sure, because it was like Rust textures, wasn't it? Like some GIFs and stuff. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yes. So what I did with those is I was trying to, the idea that I had is that similes are spells, right? So if you say that someone is as strong as a tiger or as strong as an ox, or whatever, like that's a spell. And so I thought it would be cool to look at like Robert E. Howard, like Conan short stories, and try and parse out all of the similes from it and put that to the test. And I was tentatively calling it Hyborian Witchery, because like that sounded like a fun name. And so I did. I parsed through, like I'm not a programmer, but I was able to beat my face against the keyboard with enough Python to sort of at least pull out, sentences that contained the word like, and then go through and parse them and make sure like where are the similes, and I refined it and stuff. And so I had a list of them. And I definitely thought, yes, these could be spells, but then it was like, but how do I organize them, and how do I sort them, and how do I level them, or do I level them, or do I whatever? And I saw your photos with the textures, and I was like, these are really cool. This could be fun to maybe incorporate into that, or incorporate into Hot Springs. And so I messed with them, and I did some I messed around with the covers, but then it's sitting in the folder of not dead projects, but
right.
Like it's there, but it's not there.
Well, I could never see anything that would have been used for, but it's like, I wonder if everything came of that, or what project you're working on at the time. Because I know, but going back to that.
Sorry.
So, go ahead.
Oh no, it just lagged to.
Oh,
to
So
all.
that's kind of interesting. So I mean, this goes to show, I guess, as the the muse dictates a thing, right?
Mhm.
Like you get this idea, simile as a spell, and then we go through all this work. But it's funny. So you wrote a program uh, to pull that out.
I did. And then I ended up using a lot of that later, when I did my World Builders Notebook, to then again sort of like parse through a bunch of sword and sorcery texts and then pull out verbs and adjectives and descriptors and things like that. Because I think it's really, words are really interesting. I really like words. I really like word changes. I like memes. I mean, as part of that. And so when you look at an author, like they have their words and phrases. And when you look at the genres, I think they have their words and phrases. If you were to go through, like a bunch of different like religious sects in the world,
Yeah.
and look at like, and you parse their sermons or parse their prayers or parse their whatever, like you're going to be able to tell like, oh, well, these are the Mormons because they're using this phrase, and these are the Lutherans because they're using that phrase, and these are the Catholics because they're using that phrase or whatever. And so I think the same thing applies to genre fiction. And so I'm really interested in that kind of stuff, but it's not, again, I'm not a programmer, so it's difficult to really do what needs to be done. But it's definitely something that I like to mess with, and I think it's really fun. Because I took I took the sword and sorcery stuff and I parsed it and was looking at things, and like, for example, like just guessing off the top of your head, if we're reading through sword and sorcery stories and there is the word chest, as in like a person's chest, what words do you think are going to be used to describe a chest in a sword and sorcery story? Just,
That's a good question. Used to describe chest, I would say, I would say it would have to do with somebody having a large chest, but I don't know what would be used to describe it.
a large chest or a hairy chest, or like a woman's
Probably, I
books,
probably wouldn't expect hairy.
Harry. Okay, well,
I
Harry did
wouldn't.
come up. That
It
was
did.
one of the top words. That was one of
Really?
yes.
In the
Yes.
70s, I would expect it, but in the 30s, less so.
And so then I flipped it around and was like, well, we have to prove that this is legitimate. Like, is there going to be some difference? And so I then also looked at a number, like a pretty decent number of like cyberpunk stories from the 80s. Like, well, let's look at the chest there, and like let's look at body parts there and see, are there different descriptive words? Yes, there are. Chests in a cyberpunk story are going to be bare and pale and scrawny or whatever, whereas in a sword and sorcery story, they're going to be big and hairy and burly and whatever.
Yeah.
And the color usage is different too. I mean, it's not going to be a sword and sorcery story if there's not crimson. Like, it's got to be crimson blood and crimson this and that, and the word pink never really showed up. And then looking at these works from the 80s of cyberpunk stuff, and then pink is all over the place, and I'm like, this is really, really interesting to me. But I don't exactly know what I'm going to do with it, but it's really, really interesting to me. So there you go. That's one of the things that I mess with.
It almost feels like, in a sense, he could create a set of rules for writers by genre.
I think that there is a real possibility that if someone were to make a tool that could like truly analyze a person's writing and show you what you're doing as a writer, that could be one of the most dangerous things ever, because it's like, here is a glimpse into what you're doing. And like, I think that would cause people to potentially change what they're doing. And I think it would be like, if you're a writer and you have done some sort of official analysis of your writing, that you use the word jagged as one of your go-to touchstone descriptors, and you now have a report that's like, well, you use jagged, in 50% of your works and this, whatever. Like if I'm writing and all of a sudden I write the word jagged, like that's going to fuck me up. Like I'm going to be like, oh no, I can't do that. So I think that if a tool is ever done, or if something like this is done, I really feel like you should only direct it at the dead, because then they can't, like, it's not going to mess them up. Like you should only look at authors from the past. Or
Well,
genres
actually,
from the
there's
past.
if
I
you
don't know.
get like I use Pro Writing Aid,
Mm-hmm.
and it does reports. One of them is word usage. It'll do phrase and word usage, but I use that because I'm not a skilled writer, and I keep using the same words over and over again. And it helps me to or phrases, and it helps me
Yeah.
to eliminate it. So I think I could be wrong because I'm not speaking as a really a true author, but I think people tend to just maybe just write without worrying about perfection, and
True.
then they maybe don't get worried about jagged at that point, and then
Yeah.
they go through the next sweep because if you start editing while you're writing, you're in trouble.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. Yep. I wouldn't know anything about that. That's this is what? No. No. It's fine. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's okay to have the report after you're done writing, but not while you're writing.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
jagged, and you get a little voice. Oh, this is the 8th time you've used this chapter.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, but that's one of the things too. I think that it's so important to have another person, and I think another person and not an artificial intelligence that comes in and is your editor afterwards. Like you need that person to come in and be like, this is shit. What is wrong with you? Why did you do this? And fix it.
Yeah,
You could do
exactly.
better than this. Because I think that makes a huge difference in stuff. And yeah, because if you are writing and then you're editing yourself, well, then it becomes very easy to say like, oh, well, I need to maybe I'll just go ahead and effectively edit as I'm writing. And yeah, only death and misery lie in that direction. Don't ever do that. Uh,
Yeah,
but
I
that's
think
why,
I'm able to separate it out,
yeah,
which is good. But I do see what you're saying. I think if you're probably different personalities, it affects differently.
yeah. I think for me, it would get in my head if somebody was like, oh, here is exactly like I've analyzed the corpus of your works and I've discovered that these are your crutches, Jacob. And I would be like, cool, I'm never writing again. That's it. We're done. It's over. Why did you
Yeah.
do this to me? Or why did I do this to myself? I guess. Yeah, that would be the thing. But yeah,
Well,
I mean, the thing that I have done to help myself with that process or to do that is I really like writing on paper first. Um, and then I let it sit, and then I take it and I type it into I use Sublime Text as a text edit because it's like super plain text. There's no bullshit. You just type. And so then I put it in there. And during that process of like transitioning it from the paper to the digital version, it's basically an editing pass. I'm like, who wrote this trash? This is like, what is this?
right.
And so I fix what I can fix, and then I let it sit for a while. That's the most important thing for me is you got to let it sit, because if you read it too quickly, it's like, no, this is good. And it's not. Your brain lies. My brain
Well,
lies.
I think we also grow too. I think that's also part of it
Sure.
too. Because there's some stuff, it's like, you know what? I wrote some stuff a couple years ago, put it
Mhm.
out. I'm like, you know what? I could just freshen it up a little bit, put out and maybe just do a Kickstarter, but just put it out real cheap.
Yeah,
And I started looking at it and I'm like, I guess I'm rewriting this.
yeah.
There's no just like freshen it up a little bit. It's like,
Hmm.
no, I'm a different person. Not that it's terrible, but it's just like,
Sure.
no. And I realized that something from being a very simple project was going to turn into a bigger project that I decided I didn't want to deal with at the time.
Exactly. And then it sits in a folder called Dead Dreams.
Yeah.
And
Well,
oh,
it does.
maybe for me.
Yeah, it still exists. Well, I guess let's go. Okay. Let's talk about Dead Dreams. So when you say dead dreams, do you have stuff that you've started and then that you've shelved? Or are these things you've never really went very far with?
It's a combination. There's both. I mean, there's stuff like I think that Hyborian witchery thing is one of the things that's in my dead dreams folder, and I have all the stuff there. And like it's like it's that thing where it's really easy to sort of come up with an adventure idea when you're at the bar with your friends and you're drinking and you're writing stuff down on the back of the napkin. Then it's like, this is awesome. And everybody's really pumped about it. And it's like really cool. And it's really cool. It has good core ideas. But then after everyone sobers up in the morning, you realize that, well, now I'm going to have to do the work in order to make this work. Like, it can't just be in this format. Like, it has to have a lot more. There's a whole bunch of work is going to have to go into this. So like with the Hyborian witchery thing, right? So yes, similes can be spells. The similes that are used in Howard's work are very different than the similes used in Lovecraft's work. And if you were to make a wizard that used Howard like similes, and you were to make a wizard that used Lovecraftian similes, they would have totally different spell sets, and it would be awesome. And it's a really cool idea. But what the fuck about the mechanics? And what about the levels? And what about balance? And what about whatever? And like all of these things. And so, yes, you could take it and you could just be like, here's the list. I've pulled this together for you. But I feel like if it doesn't have that, I don't know, that human analysis and structure or whatever put onto it, it's not a sellable product, right? I mean, it could be a cool blog post, but it's not something that I think that you should take and put onto a store, really put onto paper, and say like, I have killed a tree to make this thing because it's worth it. Like, no, it's trash. Like in this current format, like you have a good seed of an idea, but now it's time to actually do the work and turn it into something. And so then that's probably why I never release anything. I don't know. Because
there's a couple ways you could approach this. Mm-hmm. So one would be, and I'm not necessarily recommending either one, but I'm just thinking good ways of handling it. I mean, one is Fate Core.
Okay.
And but I think Fate is kind of, I love the concept of Fate. I really want to love it more. I love the idea of Fate more than I actually playing Fate.
Okay. Honestly, I've never played Fate ever because I was on Google Plus, and by the time I heard about it, and so in the circles in which I found myself, are orbiting the dark stars, it was like, oh no, Fate is trash. And then also when I being an independent person and creating my first work and doing this stuff, one of the things that's really important to me is I believe that when a person buys the physical product, they need to get the digital product as a part of that for free, for a lot of different reasons. But one of the things is that I'm fiercely and stupidly almost independent, and so I'm like, well, I'm just going to sell to retailers in my area, and I'm going to reach out to them, and I'm going to be like, you should have my books in your store because I don't know, that's me. And so some of them said yes, and they were like, yeah, we'll buy your books. And some of them laughed at me and said, get out of my store. Fine. That's just the way that sales works, right? But these guys had my books in their store and they bought from me a few times. And so then I found out that there's this like bits and mortar group or whatever that I think is associated with the Fate guys. And so I emailed them. And so I'd had all of this experience on Google Plus of this like big collaboration, and everybody's helping everybody out. And this rising tide lifts all boats and yada, yada, yada. And so I reach out to them and they're like, oh no, you're not an official distribution. Like, we're not going to help you. I'm the creator of Fate. No, you're come back when you're in distribution. And I was basically like, fuck you, dude. Everything that everybody said about you is true. I'm obviously, you told me to go fuck myself. Like, I will never play your game ever. Like, take your pluses and minuses and throw them someplace. And now at
Okay.
this point, I've just lost, 500 Twitter followers or whatever. When this goes live, I guess. I don't. Anyway,
So, no, that's legit. That's cool. If you're going to go out, might as well go in a blaze of glory.
if I'm gonna rant, I'll rant all the way.
Yeah. So I like that. So let's just take this back.
Right.
Because I so let me just state what I think I understand, and I don't know that I fully understand. I think there is there an open gaming license for just the basic part of Fate Core? It may not be.
I'm not sure.
Let's see. We'll see. Google's our friend. We'll just see. Is there an OGL? I know they have an SRD, but it doesn't mean it's the same as having an open gaming license.
Sure.
Games like OGL for Fate Core. Yeah, so they have an open gaming license.
Sure.
So you could have used the open gaming license in an SRD, but were you wanting to do something using Fate, or what were you wanting to do?
Oh, no. I wanted retailers who had my books in their business to be able to give customers a digital download.
Okay.
And they had a solution, and they told me that I wasn't good enough to use their solution because I was not an official distribution.
But that wasn't them. It was it's the gaming, what was that called? IGL, Independent Gaming Union? No.
Well, it was Fred Hicks that told me to go fuck myself. So,
well, there you go.
There we go. There we go. I mean, so I'm done.
I got it. So it really wasn't Fate Core. It was
It was the people that were associated with it that, yes.
And I understand. Now that makes a lot of sense. Okay, sorry, so yes. Option 2. There is no open gaming license for this, but the Cypher system does. It does purport to use the adjective, noun, verb, or whatever it is. I think it's a fun system, but really it's still mechanical unless open-ended. But that may not be a bad system to tease apart to do something similar like that.
Oh, legit. Yeah. Well, and I know there's what's it called? Wonder and Wickedness that oh my gosh. I'm blanking. There are like level-less spell ideas and concepts that are out there. That's something that it could definitely be, put together and done. It's just, again, like, doing the work. And should I work on that? Should I focus on that? Or should I focus on something else? And that's where it becomes really hard, right? Because, you get that thing. And honestly, I mean, that's kind of one of the places where I feel like I am in a lot of stuff at this moment, where it's like I have these potential paths forward, and I know that it's going to be a lot of work to go down each one, but I don't know which one is going to be the best, like which is the best choice to make right now, because everything is sort of obscured in fog at the end, which I mean that's just life, right? But it's trying to make those calls on like where should I focus my work right now?
You got finance, resources, time, and it's everything you do. There's a cost, time cost to it. So where do you apply that limited resource? So I think the difference also between us is everything that I've done has been far less ambitious.
Well, yeah. You go big or go to hell is what we do over here. And so we spend a lot of time in Hades. There it is.
So let's just go back to this because I'm still fascinated by it. So this whole adjective noun.
Yeah.
You're talking about for spells, but why can't that just be your system?
I hate systems. I'm not a rules guy, which is one of the reasons that I think so my thing is that because of when I was born, I guess, I came into video games before I came into role-playing games. And And the thing is that role-playing games clearly had a dramatic and powerful influence on video games, especially like in the early days. I mean, if you look at the original Final Fantasy, which I got when I was like 8 or 9, I guess, all of the not maybe not all of the monsters, but a significant number of the monsters in there are direct ripoffs of the D&D like monster manual. Like they pulled them, like the Rakshasa is in there, you know, as a tiger dude. Like they were all pulled in there. I got what's his name? A mono, I believe. I hit his book of like all this Final Fantasy concept art, and looking at the early Final Fantasy concept art, it's like, dude, you were clearly playing Dungeons and Dragons with your friends, like obviously. And so my perspective, and my goal with like Hot Springs Island and Swordfish Islands, if they ever, you know, finally exist, is that you don't, I think you need to buy content. I think that content is what there should be, because people already have their rule system that they like. They have the rule system that they know. They have the rule system that they play. You just need a place that you can put that into. So like when you look at, you know, gaming systems, you have like video game systems, right? Like consoles, perfect example. You've got your PlayStation, you've got your Xbox, you've got your Nintendo. Each one of those has its own rules that dictate how the programs have got to work for it. And so if you make a video game, you can then, you know, you can, I can't remember the word right now, but you can, it's not localized. I always want to say localized, but you can get your video game set up to work on, you know, Xbox and Nintendo and PlayStation. And so I think that Hot Springs Island, or I think that adventures and stuff should be like that. You should write it in a way so that then you use it with, you know, Fate, or you use it with, you know, OSE, or you use it with Lamentations, or you use it with 5th edition D&D, because you can. And it shouldn't be that much of a problem to do that. It is going to take some work. And so then that's kind of, because in a perfect world, if I could do anything that I wanted, there would be Hot Springs Island, the books as they exist right now. And then there would be a set of like supplements that's like, here's how you run Hot Springs Island using, you know, 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. Here's all the stats. Here is the way that you should set up your difficulty checks. Here's how you should do that kind of stuff. And then here's how you should do that for Dungeon Crawl Classics, if you want to do it. And here is for, you know, something else or something else and something else. So then when you buy it, you buy the dark and the field guide, and then the rule supplement for whatever rule system you're using, as opposed to, but obviously this is a bad, terrible idea. And if you really want to do a good thing, or you want to have a really big Kickstarter or whatever, you need to put the rules in the game, because I think that that's what people expect, right? Like people, there's that big board game piece where there's this thought where it's like, I'm going to go out and I'm going to buy a board game, and everything I need to play the board game, rules and all, is inside this box, and this box is going to give me everything. Whereas I'm over here being a fucking weirdo saying like, no, you already have your rule system that you've been playing for 30 years. Like, why would I try and come up with a new way of, like, I hate change for change's sake. You know, that's one of the things that's so aggravating, is that so much technology is like directly attacking muscle memory, right? So you have your Android and your back button is on the left, and then you move to iPhone and your back button is on the right. And so you lose that shit. And that same thing happens with game systems, where it's basically these just superficial changes. Oh, on this, no, you're supposed to roll low. Oh, on this one, you're supposed to roll high. On this one, you're supposed to roll whatever. And I'm just like, I don't even want to mess with that. I have the thing that I play. I want to play the thing. I just want to give you a cool place that you can play. Like, here's the setting, here's the monsters, here's the factions, here are the personalities that are involved, in the way that they are like enmeshed with each other. And you're going to get in there and mess up all that. And like, honestly, I don't care if you have to roll a 12 or a 15 to hit that guy, because if you're hitting him, you're probably making a bad decision and you're about to die. So like, I don't necessarily like, okay, like, I don't know.
Yeah, but I think what you're dealing with there is more of an overlay. But when you're starting to deal with spells, you're tied to mechanics.
Right. And exactly. And that's why it sits in the Dead Dreams folder, because that becomes because it's very difficult to do that right, you know? Yeah, because it would have to be tied into something and locked into something. And that could be made into a big system, but then I'm like, but I don't want to make systems. I'm not a systems guy. Like, fuck the rules, you know. We just want content over here. But that, that's why I live my life like I do. Um, so yeah, there we
Well,
go.
because there was this, so there was a company, Iron Crown Enterprises, back in the day. I usually know exactly why they did it, but they said, you know what? There's these D&D rules for combat for spells, but we'll come up with our own rule system that you can just bolt on to.
Yeah.
Well, they didn't really bolt on. I mean, I don't know if anybody, maybe somebody did, but I don't know anybody used arms law in D&D.
Yeah.
I mean, so I think what happens, people just defaulted to doing it, but in concept it was that, but in reality, it's like it just didn't work. I mean, it could work, but it's like, I don't know. The paradigms just were too different.
Well, I think the thing for me is that when it does come to rules, a lot of the times, like if you want to play a crunchy combat-based game, where it's like combat as sport and positioning matters and speed matters and pacing matters and all that kind of stuff, and like distance and measurements and all that, in my opinion, video games rule that world. Like you cannot beat video games at that. Like you can't beat that game Hades or like Diablo. Diablo is very good at that. Like you can make a wizard and you can be powerful and your positioning is very important, but you're able to kill like hundreds of enemies at a time. A tabletop game, I don't think is going to be able to do that or deliver that in the same way. But I think that, I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm actually secretly a story gamer or some shit, but
you just found out, you just
right,
realization.
Oh my god. No, but in a tabletop game, like you have more, you can interact with the environment, you can interact with all the factions. It's all about the like finding, I think for me, like the exploration and the finding information and the knowledge and stuff, and dealing with these really messy I don't know, political situations, or what I guess it is potentially the word, or these consequences of your choices.
Computers, it's very rigid. They're along rigid paths. Whatever decision you make has to be something that was already programmed into it.
But also it does a really good job of handling mechanics to the effect of, if you shoot this fireball and it hits a dude, it pushes him back 10 feet and knocks him into somebody else. And so it can handle all of that math for you beautifully with like gorgeous graphics and make it look really cool and make you feel, pretty good, because like, oh, I did that. Whereas if you try and if you start to get really crunchy with your spells or with your attacks or with anything like that in a tabletop game, I feel like it just grinds it down into like crap. Because then all of a sudden you're playing 5th edition and you're like, oh no, it's Jacob's turn and he's playing that multi-class abomination, and now we're gonna have to sit here for 10 fucking minutes while he's like, okay, so I did this, but then I'm gonna action surge, and then I'm gonna second wind, and then the wings of whatever are gonna blah blah blah, and you're all just sitting there like, if this was a video game, that would be handled in like 2 seconds by all of the the computations on the background, and you'd be able to move on. But the computer is not going to be good at the interaction of, okay, so you guys have just killed the king and now there is a power vacuum in this kingdom. Let's deal with that. Whereas like that's the stuff that's really interesting to me, as opposed to like the mechanical, like, okay, here is a spell that is going to turn something into a snake, and what does that really mean? I like horrible decisions, I guess, because I think that where people are having to make judgment calls and there is no good, clean, right answer. The most recent thing, I guess, that I've been working on. So Bryce Lynch over at 10 Foot Pole. I love that blog. I love what he does. I love what he writes. Like, it's one of the only things, it's the thing that I read the most religiously, if you will. Like every time a post is out, I'm like, I got to read it. But he reads all these adventures, and many adventures are not very good. And so he was like, I'm going to do a contest, and you have like 2 weeks to write an adventure that's like 8 pages long or whatnot, or it has 8 rooms and you have a hard page limit and stuff. And so I did that and I wrote it and I made, and it's done. And I was like, yeah, I feel good. Cause like I actually like sat down and was like, I have to do this. I have this time pressure. Um, and it was nice. But in it, like the whole thing is that I was like, okay, so you have this guy and he's stealing children. And obviously this is bad. But then the thing is that so this dude is in this like iceberg and he is a prince of the Fey Winter Court and he's sending out harpies to steal children. Um, but the children that are being stolen are children that have great innate magical power. And so he's basically stealing them and sending them to be trained and work for the Winter Fey Court. So obviously it's really bad because children are being stolen. But at the same time, if the children are left untrained, they could become like literal world-ending threats. And so for me, like the decisions that players are going to have to make of like, well, what the fuck do we do here? Like that's the stuff that I'm interested in. And like, I don't think that your rule system is going to be able to ever handle that choice. Like this is like, do we kill this guy? Do we try and take things down? Do we try and interrupt like his child theft? Do we take the children back home? You know, like what do we do? And I don't think that a rule system is going to do that. I mean, I guess maybe you could say that, like your players' morality is the rule system and get like that. But even then, like it becomes messy.
Right.
And it's those messes like that that I am just like, that I guess I'm deeply interested in. And so for me, I'm like, well, that's content. That's not rules. So let me make that kind of content.
Well, right. I think the problem will be is right for general plots and things like that. It works out, but I think
Sure.
And I think the problem also can be is if you're not. So I just jump around systems a lot. So if you're not real familiar with a particular system, you may not. Like I just started playing Old School Essentials.
Yeah.
Or started running it. My, that's deadly. If you don't know what you're doing, you'll kill everybody. Like,
yeah.
And now I look at creatures in the bestiary. It's like cave bear. I'm like, that could wipe out an entire party with no trouble.
Yep.
Like a whole party with retainer. Like everybody's dead. Like,
and that's so interesting too, man. Like where you have people that are like, oh, it's just a cave bear. I've played all these video games and stuff. Like, I mean, this is an XP fodder. Like I'm supposed to kill this so that I can level my character up so I can have a real fight. But then if you see like a video on TikTok, like I saw this thing of some idiot walking in the woods and there's a grizzly bear and they're like, I'm trying to approach this grizzly bear. And the grizzly bear is anyway, the grizzly bear then charges with its mouth open and it's like, oh, that's why it's able to kill a whole party of retainers. If you increase its size and weight by like, 20%, like, yeah, it will slaughter people. But I think that there's that video game and that mechanical thing that comes in where it's like, no, you were supposed to be killing this. And that mentality shift of this encounter is here for me to kill so that I can progress to the next encounter where I'm supposed to kill, and sort of upending that is difficult. It's difficult to do.
Yeah, and I think even with the players, they vary in age.
Legit.
But the thing is like, I still come back and explain to them. It's like, there's nothing balanced in these. Some things are easy, some things are hard, but the intent is not to just attack everything head on.
Right. Well, and I mean, it's hard. I've been playing, my kid was in, a preschool and I went over to, once you're in that, you start getting on that birthday party circuit, and we got on the birthday party circuit and we went over to, one of his friends' houses for his birthday. And then all of a sudden discovered that his dad plays Dungeons and Dragons 2 with a group and they play every Tuesday. And so they were like, you need to play with us. So I've been playing 5th edition with them for like the past 3 years now, which is fantastic and wonderful and awesome. And we had ended a campaign, and when that happens, they typically like rotate, who's DMing and stuff, and rotate the rule systems or whatnot. And so I was like, listen, I would really like to run some Mothership. Let's play some Mothership because I think it would be fun. I've been playing Metroid Dread on, the Switch, and so like I have space and all that stuff in my head right now. Let's do this. And just that whole mentality shift. I told them from the get-go, combat is basically a fail state. You don't want to get into combat. I mean, you can, but combat is a fail state. And even then, like, they did not, it didn't sink in. I mean, we did Dying Hard on Hard Light Station, and there's the preliminary adventure, where basically like you discover alien life on like an asteroid. And so like we did a prelim adventure and that went very, very well. But when we got to Hard Light Station, like everything went to hell in a handbasket. And like a lot of it, I'm like, okay, so you guys are in the hospital ward or like the medical wing, and the lights are flickering, and like the doors are ripped up, and there's blood all over the place, and there's this, that, and that. Like I'm trying my best to describe that this is a dangerous, horror-filled area. This is the quarantine wing. One of the doors in the quarantine wing has been ripped off, and like the stuff has been pressed outward, like the walls have been pressed outward, and you can hear this like strange raspy breathing coming from in there. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, if I was playing, I'd be like, I'm out, I'm leaving. And they were like, no, we're going to go, let's take the Marines and have the Marines go in first, and they will shoot at the monster. And I'm like, what are you? Okay, go ahead. And it didn't go well, and they got their eyes ripped out, and they got whatever, and then they're like, oh, we don't like this game. And I'm like, well, I mean, but it's those different expectations, which is interesting. So I don't know.
Well, and I think, everybody has a different reason for gaming.
Legit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm not going to say that people at different ages, but I think sometimes it could be influenced by age, by the genre you consume, and I think it's just
and what you've been doing. And
but right, people like Call of Cthulhu, it's great for some people and it's the worst choice for others.
Yeah, absolutely. It really is. So.
But it is kind of funny. I mean, still the expectation, it is kind of funny. I mean, it kind of made me think of the Parks and Rec, or was it Ron Swanson? He was upset and was at a restaurant and the steak was terrible. It was a diner. It was like 2 a.m. He goes, son, I want you to bring me all your bacon and your eggs?
Oh yeah, all your eggs.
Yeah, son. What you probably thought you heard was me say, I want a lot, but what I really says, I want them all.
Every single. Yes.
I'll say, okay, guys, I told you this is a deadly dangerous game. What you probably thought you heard me say was,
right,
things can get a little bit dangerous. But what I really say is, this is a terribly dangerous game.
No, exactly. And then to be fair, then also my failing as the dungeon master or as the referee or whatever, what I really should have done that I didn't do, and I'm kicking myself for it, is I should have had backup characters prepared so that I could just be like, now you are this person that's elsewhere in the station. Because it sucks when you're playing a game and you die and it's highly lethal, and then you have to, even if it's really quick to make a new character, it still just becomes a thing. It becomes a process. And so I really think that I would have done better with my guys if it had been, I think I would have done a different adventure also, or a different structure, because I started them out as nobodies. And what I should have done, I think, bringing them from 5th edition into Mothership. So if you're taking someone from 5th edition into Mothership, this is my recommendation from my failure, is I really think that what you need to do is you need to put them as the crew of a spaceship where there's a lot of crew, and then you need to have characters ready so that when their character dies, because it probably will, because they're like, yes, I go towards the monster with my gun because it's a gun, that then you're like, okay, cool, you've had your face ripped off, you're now actually the nurse down in section C17, so thanks for playing, but like keep playing. I think that was really, really important, and I think that's really important for a lot of the high lethality games. I haven't played OSE. I have the box set back there. But yeah, I think that for anything like that, that's why I think that the funnels in like Dungeon Crawl Classics are so good, because you start specifically like you have 4 characters So
Well,
you have
yeah,
this
and the
visceral
expectations
knowledge.
there is it's very clear that there's going to be high death rate. So it's on the
Right.
10.
Right. And so and then it becomes so much more fun and I guess more gonzo. It's easier to do things like cool saw blades come out of the wall and cut somebody's head off, and then everybody's like, oh, it becomes different as opposed to like, no, that was my special character that I spent 3 hours writing a backstory for, and you just cut his head off with saw blades from the wall. That feels bad for me because I invested stuff in the
Yeah.
beginning, and yeah, it totally changes the dynamic. So, I mean, I'm sitting here saying like I hate rules, but at the same time, I definitely realize that rules are very important and they dramatically change the game and how everything functions. I just
Well, and so like they first went in, I tried to explain to them about hiring mercenaries. So they first went in, got pretty much wiped.
mm-hmm.
And I explained to them really what's baked into old school essentials, from what I understand. I'm kind of new to this, but from what I've talked, is that you hire mercenaries to go with you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Yeah,
part of the whole economy. And it's all baked in. And then they hired it, then it made a difference. But I didn't think about it. But when a player dies, one of the mercenaries can now become a player character.
exactly. They become one of their footmen or their
You get a
whatever.
promotion.
Mm-hmm.
You get a promotion, Frederick.
Right. Exactly.
Instead of a half share, you get a full share now. Okay.
Right. You're now a sentient creature instead of like window dressing NPCs. But yeah,
Yeah.
you need to have those guys, and it makes sense. I mean, when you look at the way that like real campaigns and like the British in Egypt or whatever, like that, yes, there was the small group of British that were there that would be sort of like your PCs or whatever, but then there was this whole group of people that was there like digging out the tomb and whatnot, or they were
Right.
helping with other things, so that if one of them dies in a game
Yeah.
world, then you just swap in one of the dudes that's been digging out the tomb. And having those is very important. And so
It is. Well, you say it made me think of the explorers going up the Himalayas. Such and such was the first one to reach the Mount Everest. But I'm thinking, you got those Sherpas that are carrying all their stuff.
Exactly. Exactly.
Like,
exactly. And
what about those guys? I think they
mm-hmm.
get a bigger reward.
Mm-hmm. No, legit. But I think, and it's very unfortunate that they're forgotten in a lot of ways, because we don't hear their names and we don't know about them oftentimes. And so then that gets forgotten, and you end up with something like 5th edition where it's like, no, I'm a superhero and I'm doing everything by myself. I am completely self-sufficient because that is the way that everything works, because I am a hero. And it's like, no, dude, like you have a whole retinue of people or whatever that are helping you do this. So then going from something where you're basically playing a superhero to like, no, we're going to be more lethal and potentially more realistic, that you need to have these other people with you often gets lost or forgotten. I mean, I overlooked it for Mothership, and I'm kicking myself for it, because I think they would have had a much better time if I'd been like, no, you're a crew on a ship. Oh, you just died. Cool. Now you're actually the chef, or you're the whatever.
I think I think what the core of the game isn't always on the 10.
Mm-hmm.
Like with the old school essentials, even the mercenaries, like you can wind with a mage, it's got 2 hit points, and you're like, this is terrible. But it's not terrible if he's got a good charisma and he's got 4 henchmen helping him.
Absolutely.
But it doesn't expressly state that.
Yep. Well, and that's what's so hard. And that's one of the things to go all the way back to saying, where it's like, okay, you're hanging out with your buddies and you're writing an adventure design, or you're coming up with an adventure and writing it on the back of a napkin at a bar. There are all of these assumptions that are stuck inside of your head, and you've got to get those out and onto the paper so that you can communicate them to the other people.
Yeah.
Because, ultimately we're all alone inside of our heads. And that's one of the things that's so fascinating for me, that I like so much about these role-playing games, is that you have 5 different people or 6 different people who are sitting around a table, and the whole purpose is to try and get all of them to imagine the same imaginary space, which is literally impossible to do, but damn it, we're going to try it anyway, because we're going to go big or go to hell. And so like, I'm trying to get all of you to imagine the same place, and like that, to do that is so hard, and it's so interesting, because when it works and when it comes together and when it hits, it's magical. There is nothing like it when everybody's just like grooving, and like everyone's still imagining that place differently, but they're still just synced up, and it's awesome. Like nothing, no video games can never touch that. And I don't think it's like a story game thing. But I think that a lot of it comes where you're dealing with these like terrible situations where you have to make these judgment calls, and everybody's, you've got to have evocative language. You've got to know that, okay, we're playing a sword and sorcery game. So when I start talking about a chest on a person, they're probably going to think that it's these words, versus this dude really likes cyberpunk and he might be thinking about those words when you say the word chest. And being able to know that as a dungeon master to try and get everybody on that same imaginary plane is it's tough. That's why it's a hard job. And that's why once a person is a DM, they kind of get stuck as the DM because they're good at doing that thing. And it's
or they're
tough.
the least bad.
Or they're the least bad, right? Yes, absolutely, right? But yeah, no, it's yeah. And that's the thing too, right? Is that ultimately when you're playing these games, I think this is one of the things that people really go on a lot about on Twitter, especially, and in other places, where when you're playing a game of D&D, it's a social interaction between those 5 people. And if you have someone who's not participating or not meshing with that social interaction and they're causing problems and stuff, like you have to solve that socially. You can't just say, well, you know what, we need to have more rules about player behavior and about player things so that we can adjudicate out the bad behavior. You can't adjudicate out the bad behavior at a party. You're having a party. That's why you need to have your snacks and your chips and your whatever, because you're having a party. Everybody needs to have a good time. And then you need to have this like weird fucking seance where they're all imagining the same place. And so, just saying like, well, we need more rules in order to accomplish that. I reject that. I think that you have to handle it in a different way. So, I don't know. So with better content.
With better content. Yeah.
I don't know. There we go.
So let's go back to sword and sorcery.
Sure.
So I think it seems to be kind of a somewhat hot, well, I would say hot. It's probably of the sub genres of gaming. It is definitely, I think, has a fair amount of popularity still.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I've ever come across a system that really fully. I don't know if I've really come across a system I really like that seems to kind of catch the feel.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? Is there a system that you use, or your thoughts on sword and sorcery?
I don't know. I mean, I know I tried to play was it Barbarians of Lemuria?
Yeah.
Which like it was cool and I got the vibe, but it just didn't work for my group when we were playing, like the functional aspects, because a lot of the stuff, because I didn't run it. I had a buddy who ran it. And like one of the things was I thought it would be cool to have a character who was, magic, like a magic user with lightning. And I was like, let's tie it into topaz, because topaz and lightning have an association. So I need these topaz crystals in order to do the stuff that I'm doing. But because then focusing on the reagent, then it started making it a game problem, because, well, we have to find these topaz, stones so that our magic user can do the magic. So then it becomes constrained. And so then the whole point is like, well, we have to go around and try and find these special reagents so our magic user can do their thing. Or if we don't, then they can't do their thing. But that was their thing that they were supposed to, and they were told to come up with a thing.
Right.
And so it kind of gimps the ability to have the adventure. And so then the easiest way to handle that often is to be like, oh, look, you find some topaz. And it's like, well, now it feels like totally fake. And we're breaking the immersion because I know that this is bullshit and you're just doing this for a mechanical reason. And so I think that when I've tried, I mean, that's the number one like sword and sorcery one that I've tried playing. And that was kind of what we experienced with that. But when I've like looked at other things, I feel a lot of the same thing. Like it just doesn't work. My thing that I love I don't know, probably more than anything. I love Greek mythology. I think that like Greek myths and me, like that's number one. It's like the best stuff ever. But I don't think that you can make a tabletop role-playing game set in like the heroic age of Greece with all the gods and stuff, and have that work. I don't think that could feel right unless it was a solo player game, because yes, there were a lot of people that were traveling with Odysseus or that were traveling with Jason, but they were always background because like they were the hero and they were just there to die. They were red shirts that needed to die. So if
they're the companions to the Doctor, is Doctor Who.
Yeah, and sometimes you would have a buddy who would show up and like go along with them, but then they would go off on their own quest and do the other things. So like there were these times where they would come together. So it seems like in order to do like a heroic Greek era RPG, it would have to be like a solo player RPG where you had a DM and you had one player, and then maybe you had another player who could come in and be like a hero that would help them out with something, but then they would go away. And that having that dynamic of like, well, you are a group of 5 people who are all working together as a team, like you see in like Dungeons and Dragons, like that doesn't work with that thing. And I think that Sword and Sorcery kind of falls into that same problem, because like Conan, you can't have 3 Conans and 2 sorceresses running around. That just doesn't.
Right, exactly.
That's not the vibe. That's not what it is. So I kind of feel like maybe with Sword and Sorcery, it almost needs to be like that single player or double player.
Well, to me, there needs to be either no. If you're going to have a magic user, only one magic user to the party, and that's it.
Yeah.
And maybe by being a magic user, that creates a complication.
Yeah. Or like, or magic users should only be the bad guys. Like they need to be. You need to have your Necron,
right,
who has his like castle and is ruling this area, and the purpose is we're a bunch of thieves and barbarians that are going to kill that dude because he's, you know, subjugating everyone,
or steal his stuff before he kills us.
Right, exactly. And not just like, okay, so I am the barbarian and I am the sorceress and I am the archer or whatever. It doesn't.
I agree. It doesn't work as a D&D party.
Yeah.
And I think that D&D, and I think if magic's dangerous, if you want to do it as a party to make magic very dangerous, like, you know, like maybe it's a being, and maybe you have to just bloodlet. Something's got to die.
Yeah.
For this to work. Sorry, but if we're going to get out of this, I'm going to have to cut somebody, and they're going to have to die.
Or I think that you could really focus on the reagents that are necessary for the spells, but then the problem becomes that a spell is so specialized. The spells need to be big. It's not just like, oh, I can cast a fireball. Oh, I can cast a magic missile. It needs to be like, no, I have to time this with the eclipse and sacrifice a virgin, and but then I'm going to gain dominion over all the gold on this planet or some crap like it has to be huge, which then is why it's better, I think, in the hands of the NPCs as opposed to the players.
That's my general feeling. I don't think I would have a problem with if I was to run a game, but if you look at the magic, a lot of times in those Conan stories, they were a lot of times just summoning a creature or you know, doing something that's more affecting the environment than just a, you know, shooting fireballs or
than a personal thing. Right. Yeah, exactly. But
and I don't think Conan, we didn't play the Conan 2D20 system, but we tried running combat with it, and that was just a mess. And I think that was a hot mess. Savage Worlds, I've not tried any sort of Conan. We did do something with Cortex Plus I ran, which actually worked okay. Actually worked pretty well.
Okay.
But it is you know, it is a kind of a fine balance, because you want high action. I think the problem with the using like a BX or maybe some of these others is like, you don't want you kind of got to have your characters be heroic. They can't be super squishy, but they also can't be superhuman either.
Right. It's hard to find the balance. But I mean, I think that one of my favorite posts that honestly, I think it's 10 years old as of this year, is there's the post, it's on Ian World. I believe, basically, where somebody breaks down and they talk about, should combat be a sport or should combat be war? And I feel like those are kind of the two poles, right? Because I don't know, an example of this, another from a Reddit thread that's probably like 10 years old at this point. There were people that were talking about how if you took 10 of the strongest UFC fighters and you had them fight 10 gorillas, the gorillas are going to win because the gorillas are so strong. And that means that the gorillas are so powerful and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, yeah, if you go up against a gorilla, he's going to rip your arms off and beat you with them. But are gorillas ruling the world right now? No, they're not, because people, if we need to kill the gorillas, we know that we can't go up and fight them in like a positional battle of like, put your mitts up, Mr. Gorilla. No, you throw stuff at them, or you shoot them, or you come in the night and cut their throats. Like, that's combat as war. And so if your character is really, really squishy, and I think also if you're incentivizing them in like more of the old school ways where like you're not getting experience points for killing stuff, you're getting experience points for like getting the gold and spending the gold and getting it out of there.
Yeah.
You're more incentivized to be clever, where it's like, okay, so there's a Medusa in here, and if she sees me, she could turn me to stone. So I'm going to try and figure out a way to just never have an interaction with her. And I don't think you need a rule system to necessarily do that. It's more of like a positional environmental kind of puzzle, if you will. And
right,
and
but I think the rule system does dictate how you do.
Because, it does.
Because if turning stone only lasts for 24 hours or until you make a saving throw, who cares? But if it's permanent, you're like, forget that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think a lot of it that we kind of talked about before too is that it's about setting those expectations and really setting that, no, bring me all of the eggs, not just some of them. Like, you're hearing that, but no, like, you will die if you do this, and being able to communicate those things. And I think that sometimes people that are being a DM, like, they don't necessarily want to communicate, like, if you do this, you will die, because maybe they feel like it's a spoiler or it's spoiling some kind of surprise or something. And I would say that's something that people should work on. But it's hard. I don't know. I've been struggling with that a little bit in my in the game that I'm currently playing, where it's just, well, like this, sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought, actually, as I said that. A train started going by over here.
A literal train.
A literal train started coming by, and that took my thought with it, and I guess it's on its way to West Texas now. So I don't...
So Conan rule sets, the character you're playing in a game.
Oh, like revealing secrets, right? You know, we're playing in this game right now, and it's this it was on Kickstarter, and one of the guys backed it, and he's running it. He's really excited about it, and it's cool. It has a good theme, you know, it's like Vikings and Ragnarok is coming and all this kind of stuff. But in like one of the most recent encounters, like, we go to this wall and it comes under attack, and there's a captain that's there who's missing. We survive the encounter, and we handle it, like, go us. You know, there was only a little bit of Deus Ex Machina that was going on, you know. Yeah. But we survive. We go through. This guy's missing, so here's this tent, so we're going to go through the tent. None of the NPCs that were there knew anything about where he went. No one had any information. Like, we were trying to ask questions to be like, where did he go? Like, what do you have for us? And the adventure didn't really tell the DM anything to say with that. We were supposed to go through the intent and investigate the tent to find the clue to go to the next place. And they put the finding the clue behind an investigation check. And I'd walked in, like, I'd been asking questions. I walk into the tent, you know, I'm looking around the tent. I'm like, tell me what's in here. And, you know, he's like, well, tell me what you're doing. So I'm like, well, I'm interacting with these things, and I'm trying to figure out, you know, where Captain Eric went to. And the DM was like, okay, well, give me an investigation check. And I was like, dude, listen, there's literally no point for me to do this because it's not going to be successful. My rolls are trash. I can guarantee that. I rolled a 1. I rolled a 1 for my investigation check. And so then that put everything into a really bad state, because there was one clue. To get to the next piece of the plot, you had to find the clue. In order to find the clue, you had to do a successful roll. I failed the roll. So then what's supposed to happen? you paid $50 for this adventure and now you're not supposed to do anything, like you're done. Or no, then you have to be like, oh, well, I guess I'll go ahead and give you the clue anyway, which I think then goes directly against it. It starts harming the immersion of the game world, because now you're like, well, I know you're just telling me this, because if you don't tell me this, we just have to stop playing the game. And that's it's a bad state for things to get into. And I think it's very unfortunate when you have these nice adventures that are written that have things like that in them.
Well,
that basically,
people in this day and age should know better. I mean, this is not 1983. I mean, and I think the other thing is what I enjoy about like the Powered by Apocalypse games is where you can have a failure, but the idea is it can jog you, say, you know what, you could still say there has to be an investigation check, but if you fail, you get the clue, but something bad's going to happen.
Right.
And this is a thing that you get, that you took too long. And because you took too long trying to find this or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And you can still reward somebody for having good skills, but still also, not tie up the story by.
Exactly. But see, I think that a lot of it comes down still to this feeling of like spoiling, right? Where because I'm asking questions like, okay, so we've resolved this encounter, we're here. Is there any time pressure? Like, is there, because from my perspective as a player, and I'm assuming from my character's perspective, based on the information that I have right now, there's no reason that I can't just take my time. And if I take my time, why do I need to roll? And I feel like it's kind of ingrained sort of that sometimes they just like, people don't want to share stuff. One of the biggest pieces of feedback that I get, or the most consistent pieces of feedback about Hot Springs Island that I get that I ignore, is people saying that the map of Hot Springs Island that Jason Thompson did, that it shows all these, it shows a lot of stuff. It doesn't show everything, but it shows a lot of things. There are a lot of dungeon masters who say, I love this map, but I can't share it with my players because it has spoilers. It's going to ruin things. And I'm like, you're totally wrong. It will ruin nothing.
Right.
It's giving people contextual information about the world. Like, it doesn't matter if you know that the ogre village is in the north and the bad guy is in the volcano in the middle of the island, and the good guys, the water nereids, are down in the south in a cave. It doesn't matter if you know where those things are. That doesn't spoil your experience, because the thing that you're doing is you're having to make decisions of like, which one do we go to, because we need to be at all of them at the same time. So by giving that information, then the player is able to make that hard judgment call of like, where do we go right now, as opposed to hiding it and then saying, oh, here it is, now make your judgment call. Which has been especially tough, I think, in this. And I feel like it's made more complicated when people are encouraged to write backstories for their characters, because, so in this thing, one of our guys wrote up a backstory that he was like a minor lord, and he had some property in this area. Makes total sense. And so we go to that area because he's got some property. There's going to be some people there that we can talk to and get some information from. And we're on our way to this wall where we had this, this encounter that I was just talking about. But like, it sets up this situation where the player is playing a character, and the character grew up in this place and should have knowledge of this place. And then when you get to that place and you start asking questions like, what's been going on at the wall? What are people saying? Who are people that we should talk to? There's no knowledge or information. It's like, well, no, I don't want to tell you that because that would spoil things. Like, if I told you what this was, then the solution would be obvious. And I don't want the solution to be obvious. I want you to make a roll to find out what that is. And so it becomes very, it's kind of a disconnect. It's kind of like a short circuit almost, where it's like, well, I'm supposedly playing this person who supposedly knows things about the world, but But then when I go to that place and ask questions and try and find connections or try and do whatever, like I can't do that because the mechanic is you're supposed to do this role. So yeah, I don't know. There we go. Sorry, more ranting with Jacob next time.
I mean, the thing is, I mean, obviously it is, you can see where having random rolls versus just giving information. I mean, there's definitely
Absolutely.
good reasons for both.
Mm-hmm.
They both also create their own problems as well.
Yeah, and I think that's why you kind of have to answer that question and communicate it very, very clearly, which again is hard, of what the game is, right? Like, okay, so you're at a door and the door is locked or stuck or whatever. Is the game, we're going to sit here for 3 hours and try and figure out how to open this door? Or is the game, we're going to get through the door and we're going to find a magic item on the other side that feasts off the blood of the innocent, and we're going to have to deal with this magic item that's feasting on the blood of the innocent? I would rather get through the door and get the magic item that's feasting on the blood of the innocent and try and figure out how to deal with that crazy piece of bullshit, then sit there and be like, okay, so how are we going to open this door, guys? Are we going to knock it down? Are we going to break? Like, right. I don't, it's that kind of thing. And obviously there can be lots of different doors, and the doors are frequently rolls. And it's like, well, if you didn't make the roll, then you didn't get the info and you didn't get the, but.
Right. And I think that's another one where, and even there you can kind of have consequences like, I'm going to bust open the door. Okay. It's automatic, but you alert everybody.
Exactly.
That's always an option. That's always an option.
Right. But the thing that the DMs, well, the thing the DMs need to do that's hard to be sure to do is you've got to be able to communicate those consequences up front, where it's like, there's a lot of other people that are in this dungeon, or a lot of other monsters that are in this dungeon, and none of them are around you right now. And you know that if you hit that door, you're going to make a lot of noise, which is going to probably, like, do you still want to do that? And I feel like it's that part right there where a lot of times people, or at least, some of, especially like newer DMs that I've played with before, where it's, they haven't DM'd a whole lot, which is totally fine. Everybody's got to start somewhere. But I feel like that piece, for some reason that I don't know, I feel like people don't necessarily want to do that. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes we forget. Sometimes we feel like we've communicated it, but we haven't. So there's a lot of ways that it can go wrong. But I do feel there's something with spoilers where people don't necessarily want to say, like, oh, if you hit that, then it's reasonable to expect that somebody could come down the hall and investigate what the big boom was, right? I feel like that's there. There's something there, and I haven't been able to put my finger on it, but I do think about it a lot, because I see it with a number of people that I've played with over the years. Like, I can think to some specific examples where they didn't communicate stuff like that, and then something happens, and then we're like, well, dude, like, if we knew that there was this other stuff, or if we knew more about the environment in this imaginary world that we're all trying to imagine at the same time, we would have made different decisions. But you didn't tell us that. And it could be like, well, you didn't ask the right question of,
that's very frustrating. And I think for me, if there's something that's going to be like, I do, if it's going to be something potentially that I think that the character would know, or something that, like, maybe the characters or the players are ramping things up farther than they know, then I generally try and say, okay, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's where I think sometimes, even if somebody wants to do a certain thing, I'll, take the dice. Okay, this is the deal. 1 through 2, you succeed. 3 through 6, it ends terribly for you and you're dead.
Yeah.
Do you want to roll this die?
Right. Well, and because then it becomes more of like a gambling thing.
Yeah.
It becomes more of it changes the vibe, which is good, I think. Sometimes, because if it was me in that situation, I'm like, I know I'm going to roll terribly. No, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to come up with something different. But there are other people that I play with that would absolutely, I'm definitely rolling that die. Yeah, let's do this.
Everybody loses their mind and they roll one, and everybody's like, yes.
Right. Well, because you know the stakes. Because if you don't know the stakes, how can you celebrate?
Yeah.
I mean, how do you know that there are even worse stakes, and it's not just the game master giving you the thing in order to progress the plot? So, I don't know.
Yeah,
I love this stuff.
to finish an adventure one time, is running out of time. Is like, okay, if you want to attack this giant ape who's got a huge advantage of you, we'll just do one roll. And this one roll, You succeed, you throw it over the cliff. You fail, it throws you over the cliff.
Right. Yeah,
you only
no,
have a 40%
exactly.
chance of succeeding, and he did it. But I think I go by expectations. It's like even about going about the room. It's like I hate gotcha monsters. I
Yes.
hate cloakers, piercers, mimics. Because what does that do is it punishes a player for a character for a player for just playing reasonably, turns them into paranoid people who then take a 10-foot pole and spend 10 minutes describing how they're opening a door, but standing aside so they don't get a poison dart. And also, it's just like
that's what. Well, and then when it's like that too, then it becomes almost ritualized. And okay, so I'm going to do this, and here's the process that I'm going to do in order to keep myself safe.
Right.
And
then once somebody says the ritual,
time.
then you're back to where before. Okay, we're just going through the dungeon. Why don't you just do that to begin with? To assume that they're competent people.
Right. Absolutely. But then that's also why I think it's imperative for adventure writers to communicate the risks in the descriptions of the rooms. Like if there is, a cloaker or something, there needs to be stuff that's showing those consequences, that's making them distrustful. You need to actively make them distrustful without but then I think that kind of goes back to that spoiler thing where sometimes people don't necessarily want to do that, because it's like, well, if I'm making you actively distrustful, well, then that it's a monster, and I don't want to ruin that. And
but I think if you want to put, let's say, a cloaker on there or whatever, what's the ones lurker that hangs from there? Maybe you should give some spore, like some telltale signs.
Absolutely.
Where like, they may not look up, but at least now they know there's something very dangerous.
Or dead bodies work great. Here's somebody that's been pierced. They have a big hole in them. They're laying on the ground.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Maybe we should look. Yeah. Bodies work wonders. Skeletons work wonders. We're in a room, and it's one where like the door shuts and it floods with water. Like, you've got to talk about the holes that are in the wall. And if you block it behind a perception check, now if they're little tiny holes, then sure. Right. But if it's just like, if these are big holes in the wall that water could flood out of fast enough to fill the room in like 3 minutes, like those are sizable holes. You don't need to put that behind a barrier. You just tell them, like, they're here. This is part of the room. Tell them that the skeleton is in the corner. Now, I think that it's important, and this is one of the things that Bryce Lynch really harps on a lot on 10-Foot Pole, is that conversation, that interactivity between the players and the dungeon master is so important, where it's like, you say there's a skeleton in the corner, then it is the player's responsibility to be like, well, what's going on with the skeleton? Like, they need to ask about it. You don't need to tell them all kinds of things. Yes. You can say, like, you walk into the room, okay, there's kind of like these rectangular holes in the wall around the room. There's a skeleton in the corner. And then at that point, the players need to be like, what's going on with those holes in the wall? Okay, well, it looks like, there's some rust on them, like there's metal, maybe they're kind of wet, maybe they're damp, whatever it is. Okay, and then they say, oh, okay, interesting. And then if they never ask about the skeleton, you don't tell them about the skeleton. And that's okay, because they had their opportunity to say, what's up with the skeleton? And if they don't, then they don't. But
if you go, I got Old School Essentials, and I went ahead and downloaded, because I'm writing some content for Old School Essentials, I thought I'd better at least read. I better read something. So I downloaded the Incandescent Grottos.
Okay.
And I think that's where Bryce is coming from. And the formatting that they use is, the top part has an item. Mm-hmm. And then inside there will be parentheses next to it that give a few descriptions.
Yes.
But there's bullet points down below.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it's more detail.
Yeah, no, I did that with Hot Springs Island. I thought that was really important to do. And I know that the first place that I saw that was with Courtney Campbell over on Hack Slash Master, with sort of like, here's a bold word, and then here's the stuff that's behind that. And that it immediately resonated with me, because one of the first games that I got on a computer when we got our very first computer was Ultima 6. And in Ultima 6, when you would talk to NPCs, they would have their text that they would say, but there were certain words that were red. And if you typed in the red words, you got more information. Like that was how you navigated through the NPC interactions. And so I'm like, dude, that makes so much sense, because then basically you give the dungeon master these bolded words of the things that are in the room. And then in parentheses or brackets after them, you have more information about what that thing is, or more descriptors about that thing. And then down below, you have your paragraph of like, hey, here is here's how the room works together. Like, this is the way that the trap works. Here's sort of like a bigger contextualization. And ideally, that should make it easier as a dungeon master to run, because it's like, here are the 5 things that I need to tell you. And then those are the things that you can then interact with. So you can do that. And then while the players are thinking about what they're going to do and what they're going to ask about, you're able to read the paragraph of information about that room. So hopefully it makes it easier to get everybody on the same imaginative plane. And it also makes it easier for you to run the game without prepping and having to read and memorize everything, because you sort of you have this pause moment where like, okay, I've told you information. Now it's your turn to process it and come back to me. And while you're processing, I'm going to be reading like, okay, what's the next thing that we got to do?
Yeah, for me, I've not been prepping, and I've been able to run it pretty straightforward.
Awesome.
There's only, I think, starting out, there's a few things that kind of threw me, but for the most part, it's been very, very, very easy to run. Just
awesome.
But I think the thing is, what I've kind of have been playing with, I normally don't run fantasy, but with this one is like, I do tell them, which is interesting, is that, some things you roll for, like secret doors or whatever, but this is also about prodding and poking stuff too, and looking. And I don't think they fully understand that yet. So there's a lot of treasure. I even after played a few sessions, I said, there's still a lot of treasure you guys have left behind.
Okay.
Like, I didn't say specifically, but it's like, if they don't check the bedrolls, they're not going to find the gold pieces.
Yeah.
If they don't, if they don't actually physically start handling the statues and looking for compartments or the plinth, I'm not going to give them the gold pieces that are hidden there.
No, legit. Well, and the thing, that's what's nice about treasure, is that treasure is ultimately kind of optional, right? You don't have to poke the plinth and find the treasure in order to progress in the game. Necessarily, I mean, obviously, if it's gold for XP,
and it is,
the less gold you find, the longer it's going to take you to level up. But that's not the same way as if you don't make this investigation roll,
right?
You don't find the map that shows you where to go. Like, those are very different, even though they're mechanically kind of the same.
Right.
They're very different in how they impact the game and the game.
You're right. It doesn't affect the narrative progression of the game.
Yeah.
All it affects is it does incentivizes them to try a little harder, but it doesn't keep the game from, it doesn't bring it to a stop.
Yeah, well, and as the DM, you can, by telling them like, oh, you guys missed out on like 10,000 gold, or
you
missed out on a whole bunch of treasure. They can suddenly realize, oh, I need to change. Like, that helps. That gives them understanding. They can start playing better. They play differently because now they know. Now they get it. You're more on the same page. Those expectations that the designer had that weren't necessarily communicated accurately at the beginning are now, oh, it's crystal clear. Like, I fucked up, but I can do it better next time. And it's not stopping the game. It's not, I don't have to make a new character or whatever. It's, I love that kind of stuff. Gold for XP is a really good idea and example, in my opinion. But then that's one of the things that I did with Hot Springs Island, because, around that time, like, everybody was talking about on the blogs about, gold for XP. And so, my whole thing was, I was like, I want to have the problem of abundance, where it's like, because I think that the problem of abundance is something that well, here, we'll get really crazy. I think that the problem of abundance is something that humanity is not good with at all. I think that we don't have, like, I don't think humans have ever really had to worry about a problem of abundance. We've had lots of problems of scarcity, and we've come up with lots of solutions of how to deal with scarcity, but abundance is still kind of new and weird. And, like, the whole idea, my thing is, like, one of the reasons that I think people should get the PDF or the digital version of the physical book is that, digital files are effectively infinite. Like I can just keep making copies forever and it doesn't really cost anything. I mean, yes, it does, but at the same time, it really doesn't. So the problem is like, how do you sell like a PDF? Like you have to make your PDFs artificially scarce by hiding them and putting them behind paywalls so that people can't get them, because effectively every person in the world could have a copy of my game on their
Yes.
device if they wanted to, and it really wouldn't cost me or anyone anything because we're all connected and we can do that. So there's this like abundance problem with PDFs. Now a book is inherently scarce. I did a print run, there were 1,500 of them made. Once those 1,500 are bought or taken by people, there aren't 1,500 more. You can't take a book and like make another, like you can like do a photocopy or whatever, but you can't just like rip it in half and then one person has one half and one person has the other. Whereas with a PDF, I can have it and I can give you a whole complete copy. So that's a different problem. So thinking on that with Hot Springs Island, my concept was, okay, so if gold is XP, let's just say that these elves that were living here in the past, there is gold everywhere. There is gold everywhere. It's like in the filigree on the walls, it's on the shelves, it's on the this, it's on the that. So then the problem is, okay, so we have all this gold. We know that if we take this, we can level up all of our characters and we can, you know, become rich and powerful and whatever in the game. But then the problem becomes, well, how do we deal with this? How do we get it out of here? How do we carry it because it's heavy? How do we, you know, like what, I see it, but now shit, what do I do with it?
Right.
Because, and how do I keep it to myself? Because now other people are going to come and they're going to want it. So I have to try and maintain some secrecy. There's going to start being all of these consequences. Because I think that those are the really interesting questions. And then also I've always been really fascinated by the idea that the Spanish Empire comes to the New World and they take all the Aztec gold and the Mayan gold and the Incan gold and all, like they take all the gold from South America and they bring it back to Spain and they're like, we're rich bitches, we got gold for days. And then it's like, oh hey, inflation.
Yeah.
You know, like I think that stuff is fascinating. And so, you know, in a game world where it's like, okay, you guys have been to Hot Springs Island, you found all this gold, you've come back with boatloads of gold, and now there is inflation, and now maybe there's a war that you started because you brought this stuff back. So deal with those consequences now. What are you going to do, players? This is your fault. And like I think that that's just really, that's what I'm into, I guess.
Yeah, Ben Lawrence in his he's got the through the doors of through Old Tan's door. Sorry, and
yeah.
But some of the treasure you get is like furniture. So if you want to carry it out, it's like you're like you take two people moving this desk.
And it's that stuff is wonderful. Oh, you have this gigantic painting, and now you're carrying this huge painting, and it takes two people to carry. So what are you going to do? Oh, now you're attacked by a swarm of giant rats. And giant rats are such a boring, stupid baby monster. But like, what are you going to do? Because they're chewing on your feet right now. Do you set it down and let them chew on that? Like what? Oh, should the wizard cast a fireball? Oh, but what about that painting, guys? I mean, like, oh, I love that. That's the stuff that's so good for me. As opposed to just like, oh, well, do you hit them? Oh, I cast my magic. You know, yeah.
And I have a Fred, he said he ran a game where the people killed the dragon and got the treasure, but then they had to hire so many people to carry it. And they had to create a whole transportation chain. And that had costs. And then it brought other so by the time they actually got all the gold, like they only had a portion.
Yes. Yes.
Like,
okay. And now you've paid your taxes. Oh, look. Now you're able to talk to the king, but he's just taking your stuff. You know, dude. That those little things are so they're fun because I mean I think it's one of those things where it's like it's a problem that has no real solution. Like and there's so many different ways that it can be solved. And every table that plays the adventure is going to solve it differently because it's different people making different decisions. And I think that stuff is really cool. I don't know.
I agree. Well, I think we're hitting the time-space continuum. I think we were hitting about 2 hours.
God, yeah, we are.
It's a common occurrence.
There we go.
We gotta talk again. I think more detail about Hot Springs Island.
Sure.
which was something I was intending to do, but we had a good ramble to begin with. I just didn't want to ruin it.
No word. That's awesome. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Oh, fun. I appreciate you coming on, and I'll definitely have to have you on again.
All right. Sounds good.
Take care.
I'll see you around, Jeff. Thanks.